Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf and to another Friday Reads video. I haven't done one of those in 1 or 2 weeks, so can't even pronounce the name anymore. But anyway, Friday Reads video in which I discuss the books that I finished and still working on, and the books that I started. And it's been, I think, 2 weeks. So I've finished, fortunately, quite some books in that time. So let's start with that one. And the first one is a book that I was already almost finished, I think, when I discussed it in my last Friday Reads, and that is Elizabeth Lesser, When Cassandra Speaks, a nonfiction book published in 2020, last year, summer, I think. I told you back then that this was a chance encounter, me and the book, browsing a script and coming up with this one. I have never heard of this book, not when it was published last year, not this year. And I know Elizabeth Lesser. She is in her early 60s. She's an American author, and she is most famous for co-founding an institute, the Omega Institute, which is not a sci-fi institute, but it's adult education, focusing on spirituality, creativity, mental health, things like that. So that's, I knew, because she also gave a TED Talk, but this was just not my area of interest, let's say. But this book is about a feminist topic, and you know me. I'm always in for a feminist topic. So what Elizabeth Lesser does is she explores the stories we tell and the big female figures in storytelling, like Eva from, Adam and Eve. Eva, in English you say Eve. So from Adam and Eve, Cassandra, the title figure, the prophet in Troy, in Greek, and so all these mythological figures and story figures in stories, and then Elizabeth Lesser asks the question, what would have happened if we had this person, this woman, actually tell the story? So that is one thing that she does. In the course, with this premise as a question, Lesser also then discusses and contemplates and thinks about things in her own life, but also the big feminist questions. For instance, like, how do we define power, and why are men the powerful agenda in our societies? Can we define power differently? So I thought it was a really interesting, but also a lighthearted, in a way, conversation she's trying to have with the reader, with herself, with history. There were parts of it, I mentioned that in my Friday Reads, I think, that were just too, fluffy and gooey and new agey for me. That's not my thing. So those parts I kind of skim read, but there was still enough for me, not being a new age person, to find really interesting. So that was a good read, and I can certainly recommend it if you're interested in the topic and if you don't mind the occasional, new age kind of digression in the book. The next book I finished was a buddy read with Heidi from My Reading Life. As always, I will leave a link to her channel down below, and she already reviewed the book. So you can also check out her review, even though I think we pretty much agreed. And that was a translated work of nonfiction, Cristina Rivera Garza, Grieving, translated from the Spanish by, I'm not even in focus. Okay, by Sarah Booker. And the English translation was published last year, 2020. We picked up this book because we wanted to know more about Mexico after having talked about hurricane season. And I thought I had never heard of this author, but turned out not to be true, because I marked her a fiction book, The Tiger Syndrome, as to read 3 years ago when the translation came out, and then forgot all about it, like, you know how it happens. But Garza is an author born in Mexico. She writes in Spanish. This is obviously a translated work of nonfiction. She is a professor in the US, so she moved to the US some time ago, but she grew up in Mexico, and she writes a lot about Mexico. And this is grieving about a country, you know, dispatches from a wounded country, the subtitle says. So it's a collection of essays organized by theme about violence in Mexico, and in particular focusing on violence against women in Mexico. More than 4,000 women are raped each day in Mexico. I mean, the number is just mind-boggling. And I didn't know that. I know it from reading this book. So the book is very, what I would call, intellectual. It was not quite what I expected. I expected more kind of journalistic pieces. And the over-intellectualized approach didn't always gel with me. It's just not my thing, you know. And she quoted a lot of French existentialists, and writers like Paul Nizan, and it doesn't really work for me. But I'm really, really happy that I read the book, because I definitely learned a lot, and I got a different, not a different point of view. That's not true, because I just didn't know much about the country, but I understand more now about where the violence comes from, and the failing government, and the not taking care of the citizen kind of approach of the government. Garza especially talks about, or takes the body, the human body, as an image, and even as a metaphor, that the state doesn't take care of the body of their citizens. So it was an interesting read, but the style of the essays was not quite my thing, I have to say. Another book that I finished, also a work of nonfiction, very slim little book, Sempre Susan by Sigrid Nunez, published in 2011. And it's just about 100 pages. 107 or something. So if you're looking for a short, you know that in August, when I do my 30 books in 30 days challenge, I always pick slim books. And this was on the list, but I wasn't able to read it in August. But it's one of those books, you know, that I have on my shorties list, as I call them. Anyway, it's not really important. Sigrid Nunez is an American author. You probably know that she won the Pulitzer or the National Book Award. I always mix those two up, for her book, The Friend. And she was born in the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken, and she met Susan Sontag. First, she worked for her as a sort of, you know, glorified secretary, but then Nunez started to date Susan Sontag's son, and moved in with the two. And this is a very short account of that time in Sigrid Nunez's life when she was living with Susan Sontag. It starts a little bit before and it ends after that, but it's a contemplation about the Susan Sontag as a person, as a writer. And if you are a Susan Sontag fangirl like I am, this book is, you know, you have to read it. It doesn't really, I feel, if you know a lot about Susan Sontag, it doesn't really offer anything groundbreakingly new, but it gives a very personal account of this woman whom Nunez met when Sontag was just in her mid-40s, battling her first bout of cancer. And Susan Sontag was a complicated person, you know, edgy in all kinds of ways. So I liked it. I definitely enjoyed it, and I think if you don't know anything about Susan Sontag but want to dip into her life, this is a good way to start. It's a short little book, and it's very personal and touching, but it's also informative. So I can certainly recommend it, not only for the fangirls, the Susan Sontag fangirls, but maybe also for readers who are just interested to learn a little bit more about Sontag. And the last book I finished that I want to talk about was a buddy read with Sean the Book Maniac, and that was a short story collection, The Pain Tree by Olive Senior. I will leave a link to Sean's channel, of course, and he already reviewed the book as well, and he didn't really like it. It didn't really work for him. The stories didn't really work for him. My view on the book is definitely more positive. So yeah. Anyway, Olive Senior is an author born in Jamaica who now lives in Toronto. She is, I'm guessing her age. She is in her 50s, I think. If you know the date of her birth, I hope I'm not completely off. And she's like 35. No, can't be. And this collection of stories was published in 2015. And the title story is about a tree where one of the protagonists, a Jamaican woman, a maid, goes to leave her pain there after her son died in the First World War, stuff like that. And it is a book about pain and grieving and revenge. Those themes are like a red thread throughout the book, and she also tackles issues, like race and class. Sean mentioned in his review that he, and that's also true for me, we sometimes had difficulty to conclude the race of the main character. So I think that she probably focused more on class, or it was that me, a stupid white person, just didn't get the clues. That could also very, very well be. But yeah, I liked not all of them. I never do in a short story collection, but there were many that I enjoyed and really liked, one or two that I loved. So my take on the story and the collection as a whole is more positive. It wasn't a brilliant collection, I wouldn't say, but I also always have to keep in mind that I'm not a huge short story reader. So yeah, but I liked it. I think there were lots of them were also funny, had this subtle kind of humor, especially when they are about revenge, a woman taking revenge on her cheating husband in a not, taking the knife to his throat kind of way, but more the subtle way. I liked those. So yeah, if you are interested in stories, I should have said that, all set in Jamaica, I would say give it a try, but maybe also watch Sean's review, which was, like I said, less positive. I just briefly mentioned two books that I'm still reading. I'm not even going to hold up a copy. If you follow my Friday Reads, you know that I some time ago started Deborah Levy's third book in her autobiographical, how does she call it? Working autobiography. And the third and final part is called Real Estate. And I told you I'm taking my time, and I do. So I don't even think I will finish in October, but I'm really enjoying it so far. And the other book that I'm still reading, that I also mentioned in my last Friday Reads, is Catherine Ann Porter, Pale Horse, Pale Rider, a collection of her most famous short stories. And I'm reading that book with Adam from Memento Mori. And we are down to the final three, but those are the three long ones. So it's almost novella length, over 50 pages. So it will take us still some time. But I also started a book because it's Victober, and I better bloody start with working on my TBR, because most of my Victober books are huge. And the biggest brick is this one, Daniel Deronda by George Eliot, first published in 1876. And my edition of the vintage has 900 pages. So it's big. George Eliot, of course, a Victorian author. That's why I picked this book for Victober. And Danielle Deronda was her last book, published book, the last book she written. And if I can trust Wikipedia, it's the only book actually set in the Victorian age. Because it starts in 1865, if I remember correctly. I'm buddy reading this with Heidi from My Reading Life, and we just had our first check-in for book 1, and we are now reading book 2 for the check-in on Sunday. The book, I didn't want to read a summary. I often try, especially with classics, not to read a summary just before I start. And I haven't seen the BBC adaptation with Colin Firth, I think, as Daniel Deronda, but correct me, I might be wrong. But there is a BBC adaptation. I'm absolutely sure of that, but I haven't watched that either. I do know a little bit what the book is about, obviously about a man called Daniel Deronda, but it's actually, the first book is more about the other person that plays an important role, a woman called Gwendolen. And she is, you know, the typical George Eliot heroine in the beginning, not too likable, bit arrogant, doesn't really think she knows everything, but actually doesn't. And I'm sure we will get a sort of character development, because in most of George Eliot's books, you have this kind of heroine, whether it's Middlemarch or Romola, you know, the woman who finds her way in the end. So that's what I expect. And other than that, we just have the setup now that Daniel Deronda has met Gwendolen, but then they part way, and the rest of the book 1 is actually only about Gwendolen, when they meet in a sort of casino in Germany, in a fictitious town, and then Gwendolen they don't even speak, I think, and then Gwendolen gets a letter from her family that they are ruined and that she has to come home. She pawns a piece of jewelry in order to pay for her journey, and then we get her family. That's book 1. So I'm really excited about how George Eliot will get these two characters together and what the story of the title character will be. But so far, I'm just enjoying the ride, and buddy reading it with Heidi is always a pleasure anyway. So these are the books for this Friday Reads that I wanted to talk to you about: books finished, books still reading, and one book started. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. I'm, as always, looking forward to your comments, and I'm all caught up. Yes, yes, yes. So hit me with your comments, and I'll see you all soon in the next one.